Var det på eller var det bara på lab?
Okay, so I will introduce lab 7 now, so we can work on that for the rest of this lab session. You may also work on lab 6 or other labs if you're not finished with them from before. So just a little information. You can now find everything you need on the wiki here. Let me see. So you just scroll down to the bottom as usual and you'll find instructions and code basically. So what you're going to end up with is loading object. Sorry?
Turn it on, or are you not on this?
Good idea, thank you. So occupied saying something that I don't see, that there's nothing on the screen. There it is. So yeah, not to leave you in the dark again, on the bottom of this wiki page you find the code and lab instructions as usual. Today we're going to load an object, this axe, get it on screen like that. It's the object is basically in the file you download. So you will see, if you open it in this object viewer, you will see this is the one you will load. And then I think the textures are going to be loaded separately and then put on afterwards, right? They are
it's described in the lab, I think.
Yeah. You can go through it piece by piece.
The texture will be loaded and put on the model if you manage to load the model.
Yeah, so you don't need to deal with the textures here.
I think you have to put it in the loading code, but it's not the focus of the lab, so it's pretty simple in this case.
Yeah. So it's not about loading materials, but only object, OBJ file.
That's what the lab's focused on. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, also we in the last theory class we were talking about there's a group and an object class.
Yeah.
And the distinction between them, what is the difference?
I'll get back to that. So first I just go through and I'll get because I wanted to, that's important to answer. Also the controversy whether this file contained all the vertices or if it was just some way of reusing, because we didn't really get to the bottom of it. Something had to do about me being a bit unlucky when I searched because I found the top ones. Basically everything is in the file. But anyway, I'll introduce the lab first. So basically you have this object that you're going to load. You can either write your own object loader or you could use this tiny object loader which you can find instructions to, I think, from here, maybe no. Let me see. You probably have to find, it's a GitLab page where you can find that. Let me just get it. I don't remember the link exactly. I should put it on the wiki afterwards so you can find out where the information on it is. Let me see. Here. So you also find it in the lecture, but I think it's easier to click on it, find a link directly. So this GitHub page, you will find some information on the tiny object loader. Basically, what you will need to know in addition to what I said on Thursday, so you will find some information here. Right, so let me just go through this step by step. Yeah. So first and foremost, you download the code as usual. Then you write the model loading and set up all required resources in this model.cpp file, which is also provided in the zip you download. Then you set up all uniforms for required matrices and so on and so forth, because you're asked also to set up these viewing matrices and normal matrices and these sort of things. Well, you'll see the details here in the text. Yeah, and then you draw a model, and you have to use RenderDoc to see if you actually have something there, and adjust the camera so you see your model basically. And there's an optional task if you can improve the lighting calculation by using something from Lab 6 by adding specular reflections and those sort of things. Anything to add before I? So I could. Sorry.
That's basically it.
Yeah. So back to lecture on Thursday, we had this discussion a bit back and forth. At that time we were looking at this Sponsa thing, basically, which, let me open it again. So we just refer to the model I was talking about then. So we remove that. Just go doesn't appear to want to zoom. Oh yeah, that's why. Wrong button. Yeah, so you have these structures in here, right? Like we looked at, and each of these objects you see in here, like these arcs and pillars and everything, was basically consisting of a group, basically. And the question was that if each of these was actually, if they were repeated in the file, or if they were just, stored one by one by one. And the fact is they are stored one by one by one. So you just have to read everything. And if you want to sort of, render this in a bit of a smarter way, moving things around, you will have to do that afterwards. Because this is a very simple file format, so it doesn't have any algorithm at the end that sort of tells you how to read or something. You may load it using something called ASSIMP, I think, which will do some things for you, I believe. Is that true, or is it...
It's a more complex form loader, at least.
Yeah, but you get some scene graph, sort of.
Yeah, and it forces some format on you. So.
Yeah. It's not necessarily the best one, or...
Well, it's okay to use it if you want, but if you want to, like, design your scenes yourself, you have more flexibility with others.
Yeah. So anyway, here is everything is basically just repeated again and again and again through the file. The reason why we saw some with very few triangles was that this is actually one of its own, and then this 4 pillar in the corners here are also a group of its own, and they have quite few triangles if you look at them, maybe 20 some. And this arc down here maybe has some 30-40 triangles in total. So yeah, basically everything has to be written. Another thing. Basically, if you want to see the difference between these things, objects, group, and those sort of things, you find it basically described in this file, which I also showed, which you can also find a link to in the presentation, basically. So you basically see it here. So you organize a collection of elements. Typically, in this Sponsa, you have very similar things repeating and repeating again throughout. You basically put them in one group. If you remember this nanosuit thing I showed on the lecture, it's defined by different objects, so head, arms, legs, torso, and these are different objects that you then put this O over. And then you also have smoothing groups that you're going to deal with in this lab, because you will see in the file, if I open it, that now you have this. Let me see when I get down to the faces. So you see this S here instead. S5, S6, S so on and so forth. So this has to do about what you do with your normals, basically. So I suggest you can go in and read a little bit about it, and because that's what you usually do when you see these things. You go into the documentation, you see what it says, and if you can't figure it out, then ask. So it's basically a way of grouping, but it has to do about what you do with your normals, whether you interpolate them or what you do. Another thing is that these numbers are negative. Sorry, question?
I was going to ask why they are negative.
Yeah, exactly. Because, so that's quite important, because in the examples I showed you in the lecture, and this is also the case in many of these OBJ files, they are usually positive, but they can also be negative. That basically means if you have a whole, let's say you have some vertex coordinates, and then blah, 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 down to the something, like this, for example, and you see this face description. If that has a negative number, it basically means that -1 is down here, basically, and then -n is up here. Whereas if you have positive numbers, you start here, you have 1, and you go down to n. So it's just that you read it the other way. Now there's so many numbers here I can't really show exactly what corresponds to what list, but if I, for example, go to this cube example, which I have also in negative numbers here, let me see. It's a bit more explicit. So here you see quite some fewer. So for example, no, that was actually not the one. This. You can see here, for example, -8. Let me count backwards. -1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. So you start with the uppermost one, basically. That's what it means. So this you have to think about if you write your own loader, at least, because I think with tiny OBJ loader you don't need to consider that. But if you write your own, I mean, you may need to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, if you do like one order with minus, do you have does everyone following also have to be on a negative number, or can you like positive number and negative number?
Yeah, but I think it would be difficult to write your loader. I think it would be nice to be consistent, probably.
Right.
Because otherwise, you know, it would be a bit chaotic how we would read this. So either one way or the other, I think, is easier to stick to. Yeah.
So the file can only be minus or negative indexes or positive, right?
I think you can mix them, but I think you just have to. It becomes a bit troublesome when you're gonna read the code, because sometimes you read one way, sometimes you read the other. So probably it's best to just stick to one or the other. But I think that, you know, if you could choose, I would choose to have positive numbers there. But I mean, it depends on how you say it and who's made it and everything. And if it's negative number there when you load the file, then basically that's what you have to stick to, more or less. But I would be surprised if I saw someone who has it mixed. I think these files are more or less created when you make some 3D, when you model some 3D object in Blender or Maya or whatever you use, and then you just set some options, and I think that the file is basically written out in some format or another. I don't know if you have control over which sign these numbers will have. Did you answer your question? Or? Yeah? Any other questions? So then you can just work on this, or lab 6 if you're not finished with that one. So, and we can also continue with this next Tuesday if you're not finished with it. Yeah.
When are we going to have the code review thing?
You thought about code review.
Like when we sit down with you guys and go through our codes.
Or you mean code
for assignment one?
Oh, for assignment. Haven't really decided. I don't know. Did you have it last year?
Yeah, we did it right after the presentations.
Okay.
But we haven't had time to look at the code yet, so